If you want amazing heart rate tracking during exercise for a decent price, usually a Huawei watch from the GT series is the way to go. Huawei watches are not crazy expensive, they have usually good hardware and also really good firmware when it comes to heart rate tracking. Now, I'm testing the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro myself, but I also want to test the normal series. Unfortunately, at the moment, Huawei only had this more feminine watch available, so I'll give that to Raphael for testing. However, the sensor module for the heart rate tracking should still be the same as the male version as well, so most of those results should translate. I'll also check with Huawei if at some point they have the male version available, and we'll do some testing with that as well. But generally the results should translate. There's just two differences, and that mostly has to do with the size of the device. So because it's smaller and lighter, there will be less rocking on the wrist, which should potentially improve the heart rate tracking performance.
Hi, Rob from the future here. I just wanted to say I received the larger GT6 on time as well, and I'll be testing it on myself. But back to past, Rob.
However, because it's smaller, there's more potential for light to leak out from the outside, which should actually degrade the heart rate tracking performance. However, overall, I am expecting a lot from this device. Well, let's quickly unbox it and set it up, then we'll go through some of the specifications. I'll focus more on the male version, but I'll also talk briefly about this version right here, and then we'll get to the testing. But since there's so much testing to do this period, I'll mostly be testing this on Raphael. So Raphael will do a lot of exercises with it, hopefully, and we'll compare the performance of the Huawei Watch GT6 to a bunch of other watches he's tested for me in the past, so we'll get some impression about where it ranks amongst all the different devices you can get. I'm expecting a lot from this device though. Usually Huawei watches from the GT series are amazing at heart rate tracking, and I expect something similar from this device, so I'm really curious. But as I said, let's unbox it, set it up, go over some of the specifications, and we'll also briefly look at how that differs from the GT6 Pro. Now this is the one I'll test on myself. There will be a separate video for that, which is linked up here. So let's quickly set it up. Alright, there we have the Huawei Watch GT6, and I was actually already told I will get some of the male versions of the watch as well, so I'll test those on Raphael after I get the new ones. But first I'll give him this version so we get as much test data as possible. There we go, it's definitely a much smaller device than the larger Pro version that I have right here. And the charging puck will be identical, so instead of unpacking that one, we can grab the exact same one right here from the Pro. And honestly, I do quite like that this is a bit more understated than some other Huawei watches have been in the past. Now it is clearly quite feminine, but the sensor could still be quite good. As you can see right here, whoa, there's still something we need to remove. So the sensor is still the same, but as you can see, there is some more potential for light leakage from the outside just because that backside is a bit smaller than when we compare it to the Pro version, for instance.
Now let's briefly discuss the specs of the normal GT6, but I'll keep it short since much is the same as the Pro model. If you want a titanium casing, sapphire glass, ECG, you love trail running and want fancy golf maps, that's the Pro model, and I've got a separate review for that. Here we focus on the standard model. The standard GT6 comes in two sizes, 46mm with a 1.47-inch AMOLED display and 41mm with a 1.32-inch AMOLED display, plus pivoting loop lugs that fit smaller wrists better. Huawei quotes up to 3000 nits of peak brightness. In real life, as I also said for the Pro, I could read it fine in direct sunlight, so that's a good feature. The larger one is of course heavier, roughly 51 grams for the 46 and 38 grams for the 41mm models, both without straps. You do also get a mic and a speaker for calls and prompts, and the materials as said are more basic than for the Pro. The GT6 is made of stainless steel, and though I didn't get the exact screen specifications, it's likely some proprietary glass-like material. On the other hand, the Pro version gets that titanium case and sapphire glass. In terms of battery life, Huawei quotes these lab numbers. For the 46mm version, 21 days with light use, 14 days with typical use, and roughly 40 hours of continuous outdoor sports tracking. For the smaller 41mm version, that goes down by about 30 to 50%, up to 14 days light, 7 days typical, and roughly 25 hours of outdoor tracking mode. Water-wise, it's rated at 5 atmospheres, similar to the Pro model. Again, this means it's swim-proof, not dive-proof, and I'd also say rinse after going in salt water and avoid saunas and pressure washers. The GPS uses Huawei's new sunflower positioning, similar to the Pro, which is supposed to be better in tricky situations. But as you saw in the Pro review, it's not perfect yet, but of course we'll take a separate look at the non-Pro version. Cycling is the big update this generation. You'll get virtual cycling power without a power meter. It basically estimates your power from speed, gradient and weight, and of course your bike's weight, but this functions outdoor only, so no Peloton or Swift support. You can set multiple bike profiles, and I really recommend you do that because your bike weight makes a huge difference. And of course I'll show you the results of my testing. If you do have a power meter, also the non-Pro version can connect to it, which will estimate your FTP, but it wants quite a bit of effort, so at least 40 minutes total with 15 minutes above 80% of your maximum heart rate. Now, similar to the Pro, there is Bluetooth support for third-party sensors, so you can also connect a heart rate monitor, for instance. You can also broadcast your heart rate from your watch to third-party equipment, and there's this new phone as bike computer view in the Huawei Health app. Now, you can import routes from Komoot, for instance, and you can plug in GPX files. Now, similar to the Pro, it auto-detects rides and it includes fall detection with SOS. And there's a bunch of other sports that also give you detailed stats like running, hiking and skiing, and the standard golf modes. So not the enhanced trail running pages and vector golf maps that you get on the Pro version. In terms of health features, the TrueSense system now also adds all-day heart rate variability on the non-Pro version with emotion and stress checks every 10 minutes. Plus a health insights pane that tries to tie together your mood, sleep, training and heart rate data in one overview. Now there's also a pulse wave arrhythmia feature now that can show you your AFib risk, but only in supported regions, and the ECG measurements are only available on the Pro version, so you don't get ECG on the non-Pro. Bottom line, the regular GT6 gives you the same GPS, same cycling features, the same battery life on the 46mm version, but without the premium materials, ECG or fancier trail and golf screens. But mostly it's the same, I would say. But what about the testing? Is it also the same? Well, let's take a look and let's start with the heart rate tracking performance. And let's start with the heart rate tracking results on me. So these are the results for spinning. And after that, we'll take a look at the results for Raphael. So I used the larger version of the GT6 and he used the smaller version. So along the horizontal axis is the heart rate according to the reference device. Along the vertical axis, the heart rate according to the GT6. And if they would perfectly agree, all values should be on or close to the blue line. And they are on or very close to the blue line, so that's good. And the correlation or R value is also very good at 1.00, which is rounded to 1, because the maximum value is 1, so 1.00 is super close to that. Now, I was only able to do a single indoor cycling session, so these are the results for indoor cycling. So it's a relatively limited test, so there will be more deviation either up or down compared to many of the other devices I've tested. But it's at least a good first indication that it performed pretty well. But let's take a quick look at the spinning session itself. So here we have the spinning session itself with the time along the horizontal axis, the heart rate on the vertical, the Huawei Watch GT6 in red and the reference in blue-green. And this, as we saw from the overview, looks basically perfect. So the red line overlaps almost perfectly with the blue line. So I'm super happy with this result. Now we can put these results into the perspective of many other devices I've tested before, but with the big asterisk, this is all based on a single spinning session and normally I would have more, but still it's informative and those results are right here with the Huawei Watch GT6 marked in red. So that correlation value we're looking at before is along the horizontal axis. And on the vertical axis, we ordered the watches from worst to best based on that correlation value. And the Huawei Watch GT6 is the best performing device out of any I've tested, though I suspect with more testing it might go down a little bit. And I can show you why I think that if we zoom in a bit. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.9 or higher. And here it's very clear the Huawei Watch GT6 has the best correlation out of any devices I've tested. But if we go a little bit down, we have the GT6 Pro with the exact same sensor, mostly the same design, and it's doing a little bit worse. And I had quite a few more spinning sessions for that device. So I suspect it was a little bit of a fluke that it did so well. I had a similar problem with the Huawei Watch 5, for which I only did 1 or 2 spinning sessions as well. Overall though, still a very good performance of both the Huawei GT6 Pro and the Huawei GT6. I can really recommend them for indoor cycling, at least based on this testing. And they're doing quite close to the performance of the Apple Watches and the Pixel Watch 3, all of which are amazing heart rate trackers. So for cycling indoors, definitely a really good result of the Huawei Watch GT6. But let's make things a bit more difficult and let's take a look at the results for running outside. Okay, so those are the results for indoor cycling, but I just realized while I was recording in the studio that I didn't do any runs yet with the GT6. I did all my runs with the GT6 Pro. So I'm now going for a quick interval run to see how the GT6 performs for running. But of course, we also have Raphael's data in addition. So let's get started and I'll see you back in the studio. Okay, we're back in the studio and I realized I did already do a run with the GT6. I just hadn't added it to the data export. I've now done it, so we now have 2 runs done with the Huawei Watch GT6. So more data is more better. And here we have that overview. So the points are again very close to the blue line, looking really good, looking better even than the results I had for the GT6 Pro. I think this must be a fluke that it's doing better for both of these exercises so far. Or maybe because there's an ECG next to it, there's other sorts of reflections on the back of the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro. I cannot imagine that's the case. I think it's just by chance or because I wore the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro on my right arm. Overall though, this is looking very good. For those 2 runs, we only had a little bit of deviation right here, but the correlation is very high at 0.99. Let's take a look at those 2 runs themselves though. So here we have the first run I did 2 days ago. This was also a relatively short 5K run. And you can see that the Huawei Watch GT6 overlaps very well with the reference. It just missed these details right here. So twice I probably had to stop for a moment or something, so my heart rate dropped a little bit. And the GT6 didn't detect that, but otherwise looking very good. And also this second run from an hour ago or so looks very good. So very good agreement between the red line of the Huawei Watch GT6 and the reference Polar H10. And again, let's put that correlation value into the perspective of many other devices I've tested before, which you can see right here. And it's again one of the top performers out there, so looking really good. Let's zoom in a bit to just the better performing watches, which is right here. And if we're really taking this literally, the Huawei Watch GT6 is the 5th best performing watch I've tested. But it's actually not that far from, for instance, the Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro, also the Huawei Watch Fit 4. All of these did rather well for tracking my heart for running. And the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro is also not that far away, though if you check out that video, you will see there were some more weird deviations going on. This was definitely a better performance. Again, I had many more runs for the GT6 Pro than for the GT6, but of course Raphael also did some runs, so we'll check those in a second. Overall, both of them did pretty well, but the GT6, at least just looking at this data, did better than the GT6 Pro. I don't think we can say it's a better performer though. I would need to do more testing with the GT6. However, if we assume it's at least somewhere in between these 2 results, it's still a pretty solid heart rate tracker also for running. But now I want to make things potentially even more difficult, and let's take a look at the results for cycling outside. Now this can be more difficult because there's so much more tension on my arm and also a lot more bumpiness. So let's see if the Huawei Watch GT6 was able to track my heart rate for cycling. And here we have that overview, and that overview shows mostly good results, though for some reason for a little bit detected a too high heart rate and also a slightly too low heart rate sometimes, but generally pretty good with a pretty decent correlation at 0.98. So not exactly 1 anymore as we saw for cycling indoors. Still looking pretty solid, though I do want to see when it detected a too high heart rate. So let's have a look. So this first bike ride looks really good actually. Some of the details are missed sometimes. So this dip right here, for instance, also this dip. We actually saw something similar for running where there's 2 small quick dips were not detected, but this will be good enough. This long ride also looks really good actually. There's no big issues here. Here we see that the Huawei watch for a moment detected a too high heart rate again because that dip wasn't fully detected. Right here, small deviations, nothing big. And for this long ride, detected a too high heart rate here. I think we saw something similar for the Pro version. Let's quickly check. So these are the results for the GT6 and these the GT6 Pro, and both of them for some reason right here detected a different heart rate than the reference, though the difference they detected was not the same. So the Huawei Watch GT6 was just a little bit higher and the GT6 Pro quite a bit higher it seems. So I'm not sure why they both struggled. I think I was going downhill. There was quite a lot of wind and it was getting quite cold, so that might have played a part. Maybe the vessels in my arm restricted a bit, messing up that signal. So I'm not sure what's going on here. I do assume the reference was still correct because the GT6 was actually again a lot closer than the GT6 Pro, and the GT6 Pro and GT6 actually didn't agree with each other. And also later on here, the GT6 is correct, or correct at least it agrees with the reference. And the GT6 Pro detects a too high heart rate here. So that really makes me think that the GT6 and GT6 Pro were not correct here, and the reference was correct, and probably because it was really getting cold and there was a lot of wind going downhill. Overall though, still a pretty good performance by the Huawei Watch GT6. But again, let's put these results into the perspective of many of the devices I've tested before, and luckily the GT6 is still among some of the best performers out there. I do want to zoom in a bit again, so these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.8 or higher, and the Huawei Watch GT6 does about as well as the Pixel Watch 3, but also the Huawei Watch Fit 2, the Huawei Watch Fit 4, and it's actually not far away from the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro. So I think overall, after many testing, and if I would also alternate them between my left and right wrist, I do expect roughly similar performance from the two. So in terms of heart rate tracking, really good performance by the Huawei Watch GT6. I can really recommend it for these cardio exercises. I don't think you will have major issues if at least it performs the same for you as for me. But let's now take a look at the results for Raphael, because that second subject can either confirm or disprove what I've been telling you. Now, of course, Raphael was using the smaller version of the GT6, but the results look really good. So these are the results for running for Raphael, and almost always the heart rate was basically spot on. So the correlation is now 0.99, so very close to 1 again. So honestly, just a very good result. So running looking really good for Raphael, but what about cycling? That also looks pretty good, though we have a bit more deviation now. Still, almost all points are on or close to the blue line with a slightly lower correlation at 0.98. Now I'm quickly going to show you a few examples for running and cycling on Raphael and comparing it to the competition, but then we're going to move on to another type of test. So here we have the first run that Raphael did, looking really good, nothing to complain about. And also this second run looking really good. And he did quite some intervals, or there were at least quick changes in his heart rate. And these were mostly detected by the Huawei Watch GT6, so looking really good. And for cycling, we have 3 bike rides. This one looks pretty good, though there's already a little bit of deviation. Also for this one, some of the small details are missed, otherwise looking good. And also here, nothing to complain about. But generally, devices do a little bit better on Raphael than on me. So let's compare these results to the competition. And here we can see that the Huawei Watch GT6 is among some of the better performers, not the absolute best performer. So these are the results for running. And if we look at where the Huawei Watch GT6 is, it's sort of in the second tier of devices. Only the Pixel Watch and the Apple Watch are doing better on Raphael. And for biking right here, we see more or less the same thing. Only the Pixel Watch and the Apple Watch Series 10 are doing better, and the Huawei Watch GT6 is very close to those. So overall, very solid heart rate tracking performance by the Huawei Watch GT6, both on me and on Raphael. Now you might have noticed there's no weight lifting here. That's because in Strava this was not exported, so for some reason running and cycling, and also cycling indoors, were synced to Strava by the Huawei Health app, but weightlifting wasn't so far, or maybe I made some kind of mistake. I have to look into that. But in general, for weightlifting, I don't recommend using a watch. There's just so much tension on your wrist that most likely you're not gonna get accurate heart rate measurements. But enough about heart rate tracking. Let's move on to sleep stage tracking. So can the Huawei Watch GT6 track your deep sleep, your REM sleep, and your light sleep? Now the way we're going to test that is by comparing the sleep stages of the Huawei Watch GT6 against the Z-Max EEG headband, which is a headband specifically designed for sleep stage tracking. It's used in several scientific studies, and it can actually measure my brain waves. And this is also not perfect, but definitely good enough to get a rough impression of the performance of different devices. So let's take a look. Now one quick side note here, I only have 3 nights of data for the GT6, a relatively small data set. And one of these nights I had really poor sleep quality just because of some things happening in my life. I couldn't sleep so well. So that might throw off the results a little bit. But as you can see, they sort of make sense, I think. So let's take a look. And here we have the sleep stage tracking results. and they don't look very good, honestly. But let me quickly explain what you see here. On top, we have the sleep stages as tracked by the reference device. On the left is the GT6, and each column here is normalized to 100%. That means that we can see what percentage of each of the sleep stages according to the reference was predicted as the sleep stage by the GT6. Now, in an ideal world, all these values in yellow should be 100%. But instead, we see that only about 45% of what was deep sleep according to the reference was also predicted as deep sleep by the GT6. And instead, quite a bit of it was instead predicted as light sleep or REM sleep. Light sleep agreement is also not great at about 60%, and REM sleep agreement is very bad at about 44%. And we actually also saw that for the GT6 Pro, REM sleep agreement is just one of the worst sleep stages that the Huawei watch tracks. And we see this for many devices. REM sleep just appears to be a very hard sleep stage to track. So overall, not very good sleep stage results. But let's put these results into the perspective of many other devices. Here we have an overview of many of the devices I've tested in the past, with the average agreement over the 3 sleep stages along the horizontal axis and the worst out of the 3 sleep stages along the vertical axis. That basically means that the further to the top right the device is, the better is its agreement with the reference device. And all the devices marked in green were tested against the Z-Max EEG headband, so the one we used in this video as well. And you can find the Huawei Watch GT6 right here. So really not doing very well. And it's very close to the performance of the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro, but also the Huawei Watch GT4, the Huawei Watch GT5, the Huawei Band 9. So a lot of Huawei devices are roughly in this lower area right here. So really among some of the worst sleep stage trackers out there. And that makes some sense as most manufacturers use the same sleep stage tracking algorithm across their entire lineup. And I think the same is true for Huawei. But that also means that likely they haven't updated the algorithm for probably 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years. So I'm really not that happy with that performance. And the actual best sleep stage trackers are all the way up here. Now, these are also not perfect and will also have their quirks, but are good enough for me that I use them in daily life. Now, the 4 best brands in sleep stage tracking at the moment are Aura, Apple, Nukwa or Sleep 2, and the H Sleep Pod. Now, Apple is really a good sleep stage tracker, and if you're on iOS, it's actually a pretty good choice. So the data interpretation of Apple at the moment is not that great. Also, the Oura Ring is a very good sleep stage tracker, which can be used across platforms. Sleep 2 is a subscription service, so think about if you want to pay that, but it's actually quite good. And then finally, the most expensive device out of this entire testing range is the H Sleep Pod, which is really expensive and has a subscription on top. It's my favorite overall device for sleep because it both improves my sleep and tracks my sleep really reliably, but it's really expensive. So it's not actually a device you wear, but it goes around your mattress and actively cools and heats each side of the bed independently. So I'm quite a hot sleeper, so I really need to be cooled down. And the H Sleep Pod has been amazing for this in summer. So both the blanket that is on top of me and the surface underneath of me are cooled, and I can sleep even on those hot summer nights. And if I had a partner, or in the past when I had a partner, she could set her own temperature independently because almost everybody wants to sleep hotter than me. But to me, the H Sleep has been a godsend. And if you want the best discount possible on it to make it just slightly more affordable, you can use my affiliate link up here or down here, and you'll be supporting the channel financially at the same time. But if you don't want to quite spend that much money, or you really don't have much to spend, Fitbit devices are also quite good, so they're in sort of the second tier of devices together with the Whoop strap. So both of these I can also recommend generally for sleep stage tracking. They will just be slightly less reliable. But getting back to the Huawei Watch GT6, I just cannot recommend it for sleep stage tracking at the moment. What you probably can use the Huawei Watch for is tracking your total time in bed and your total time asleep. And those are already very important metrics. You can also see what time you probably fell asleep. So overall not useless, but the sleep stages like deep sleep and REM sleep, I just wouldn't trust if I were you. Finally, there are 2 more tests I want to look at. The big one is GPS tracking. So can the Huawei Watch track your location accurately when you're riding or running, which is important for your speed, your distance and your pace. And we're also going to take a look at that cycling wattage feature. But let's start with the GPS tracking. Now, the way we're going to test the GPS tracking performance is by checking the consistency between several signals. So we cycle the same route or run the same circle several times, and we hope that the GPS signals overlap, which more likely means that the GPS tracking was accurate. Now, I have fewer data points than I had for the GT6 Pro, but I still have 3 times the cycle to work, twice the cycle back from work, some data on Raphael, and also some data for running. But let's start by looking at 3 times I cycled back from work. So luckily the signal was acquired quite quickly, so that's good. However, the consistency in the beginning isn't great. There's quite some deviation right here between the signals, also right here, really deviating. Then here looking quite okay, here quite some deviation. This is definitely not looking very good. Look at where this signal is all the way down here. And here it's looking a bit better. This is looking quite okay. I mean, this is not the worst I've seen, though also definitely not good. There's still quite some distance between the signals, so overall I'm not that happy with this performance. Just looking at it overall, look at this signal all the way out there. But let's now also take a look at the results for twice I cycled to work. So here we have the results for 2 times I cycled to work, so I only have 2 data points for this, unfortunately. The signal was acquired quickly, so I always start my ride on the corner right here. So that's looking pretty good. But the consistency is not great, so there's quite some distance between the signals here. Also here the 2 signals deviate quite a bit. Here there's also quite some discrepancy between these 2 turns. This is also not looking that great. This is an easier area for many devices to track. Still some deviation. This is looking good though. This is one of the easiest areas. Here it's also looking good. So near the end it is getting better, though there's also an easier portion to track. But to further confirm this, let's now take a look at the results for running. These are the GPS tracks for running. So I ran in this circle many times over 2 runs. So let's actually start by looking at 1 run first. And there's still quite some discrepancy between the signals. Yes, I don't always perfectly run in the same location, but I try to stay within a meter or so, and there's for sure quite a bit more deviation. Here it really doesn't look that great. Also, this area right here is pretty bad for this run. I did actually at the end of the run walk into this area right here, so that's a true signal. But you can see the signals basically all over the place here. Down here it looks pretty good, but overall you can see quite a bit of deviation between the signals, really not looking that good. And this second run is not any better. Look at this track right here. It goes all the way outside of the area. And also here really not looking very good. I have no idea what's going on here, for instance. This is just looking really weird. Look at this GPS track right here. Overall, this really just doesn't look very good. And I'm quite confused. It also didn't look great for the GT6 Pro, but this potentially looks even worse. But let's now quickly take a look at some tracks for Raphael. I have very limited data. I think I had 2 bike rides for him. Yes, these are 2 bike rides for Raphael right here. So he started his ride around here. I won't dox where he lived, but you can already see some deviation here. Also here, it just has him going all over the place. Now, of course, the calibration with the actual map isn't that important, but the fact that there's this weird deviation that doesn't look good. Also here, quite some deviation between the signals, whereas here they're coming together again. Then here they're super close. Then he did take 2 different routes. Then here it's looking okay. This is also not too bad. Here's actually looking quite good. Here he probably did take 2 different routes. So near the end it's looking better, but in the beginning it really didn't look that good. So this end is actually quite good. The beginning though, I have no idea why there's such a big deviation between the 2. And it's also somehow a bit weird that they're quite a bit away from the map, but that might just be a calibration issue and also the way these maps are constructed. If I summarize it, quite a confusing GPS tracking result. Definitely not very good, I would say. Again, I am running beta firmware and software, so there might be improvements over time. But these are the results as I have them now. I'm just sharing them with you directly. To close off this next exercise section in the cycling, let's take a look at that virtual power meter that Huawei has. Can a watch without having a power meter installed on my bike actually measure my power? Well, let's take a look. And as I actually mentioned in the GT6 video, I couldn't actually export the data from the power meter or the virtual power meter. I could export it from my real power meter. So I had to deal with screenshots for now. So right here, you can see a screenshot of the virtual power meter as measured by the Huawei GT6. And on top, we're gonna put the power as measured by an actual power meter. So it was the Garmin RS200s that I've installed on my beautiful Van Rysel bike. And if we put that on top, so in blue, we have the virtual power as measured by the Huawei GT6. And now in pink, I put the power as measured by the Garmin Power Meter on top. And we actually see a very similar result to what we also saw for the Huawei GT6 Pro. When I'm making a decent effort uphill, the agreement is actually pretty good. However, the moment I put on a bit more power, it isn't quite as good. So then the power meter, the actual power meter, detects a higher power than the Huawei GT6. It's always overestimating a little bit. And then here, when I'm going slightly downhill, so I still have to pedal a little bit, but I'm also getting a lot of assist from gravity, then the Huawei watch estimates a lot of power that I'm actually not putting in. Often I'm putting in half the power that the Huawei Watch GT6 is predicting. Just for comparison, let's quickly look at the results for the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro. Here we had the GT6 results, but I'm going to switch back to the GT6 Pro. So really very similar results. That makes sense as they use the same algorithm and the underlying data is relatively easy to measure. So these results are actually not bad, but here for both the GT6 Pro and the GT6, the calibration will be very important. And the fact that in the beginning there are always slight underestimates of my power and later on there's an overestimate of my power might also have to do with the weight that you put in. Maybe because I had a few kilos extra with me on the bike, just because I had water and food with me, the algorithm could actually be slightly off and always be a few watts too high or too low. I'm actually quite surprised at how accurate it is in the end. It's not bad, but you can see that especially downhill it's doing very poorly. And for instance, right here, it totally missed that I was putting in any wattage at all. Let's compare that to the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro. Also, that partially missed it. So there will be moments where it really struggles. So I would generally not rely on the virtual power from moment to moment, but comparing between rides could be reliable. So if you're getting better and better at cycling, you will probably see those wattages going up, and those increases or decreases, if you're getting worse, are probably still a good estimation of how your cycling prowess is developing. But what is my final conclusion on the Huawei Watch GT6? My overall conclusion on the Huawei Watch GT6, well, it's a pretty decent watch. Similar to the GT6 Pro, the heart rate tracking seems to be really good. It did even better in my testing than the GT6 Pro, though I don't think there will be a significant difference between the two. Likely it's just by chance that it did better on these exercises, though I cannot say that for sure, of course. Maybe there is some reason why the GT6 would perform better than the GT6 Pro. On both me and Raphael, the GT6 did an amazing job in terms of heart rate tracking. The sleep stage tracking, as you saw, just wasn't very good. I wouldn't get it if you care about your sleep stages in particular. Now, the sleep stages don't necessarily need to be very important. Probably your total time in sleep and total time in bed and your bedtime are already a good place to start your sleep tracking journey. And then finally, the GPS tracking was a bit confusing to me. I don't really understand why it's not doing super well and why we saw some big deviations both on my testing and in Raphael's testing, and why those runs really looked kind of bad. And I think the GT6 Pro actually looked a little bit better in that regard. But again, they should have the same sensor suite in them. Maybe we can chalk it down to early firmware, because I'm testing this quite early before the release. It's now about a week and a half before the release, even a bit more. So I'm not sure if that will improve over time. I might be able to test it in the future. However, I wasn't super impressed. The virtual cycling power, on the other hand, was quite interesting. It did a decent job, better than I expected, honestly. But as we saw, there are some caveats there. It seems when you're going downhill and pedaling a little bit, it gets confused. Still, if you're just getting into cycling, it's probably a good start and probably a better deal than immediately buying a power meter. I think the RS100s of Garmin go for like 400 euros or so. You can get cheaper ones built into the crank arm, but it's a lot of effort and still quite a lot of money. And only if you really get into cycling do I think it's worth it to get power meters. But does any of this mean that the GT6 or even the GT6 Pro is the right watch for you? Well, choosing between the two, depending on how much you're willing to pay, I might actually go for the GT6 instead of the GT6 Pro. I don't need the extra features on the GT6 Pro myself, and I think saving some money is quite good, and the GT6 gives more or less the same performance. Then the next overall question is either of these compared to the competition the right one for you? And as always, there's a lot of nuance there. I love that word nuance, because once people know I review smartwatches, they always ask me which one is the best. But the question is, which one is the best for you? If you need solid heart rate tracking, you like the Huawei ecosystem, and you don't need sleep stage tracking, then maybe it's actually the right choice for you. Huawei has a pretty decent app. It's not my favorite, but it's pretty okay. And their prices are generally pretty good. Though I might even consider getting, for instance, a Huawei Watch Fit 4 or Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro instead. I really like those devices, and I actually like the square design. But if you prefer a round design, then the GT6 might be the right choice for you. So in the end, it's all up to what you need. I generally recommend checking out the testing that I did for the thing that's important for you, and then deciding for yourself. Luckily, I also provide these kind of overviews where you can actually see which watches do well in which category. So in the end, it's up to you to decide. Now, if you do decide to get a Huawei Watch GT6, a GT6 Pro, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, or you decide to get a Whoop strap, an 8-sleep pod, or something else, please check out my affiliate links down there, many of which give you the best discount possible. And on Amazon, it doesn't save you any money, but you support the channel. And that's just one way of covering the costs of this channel, and also making it potentially at some point possible for me to do this full time. Now, I think you will like this video on the GT6 Pro or this video on the 8-sleep pod.